afternoon. My name is Sean Ben. I'm with Energy in Denver, Ohio. What I'm here to talk about is shale development, what's really happening over in eastern Ohio. We are essentially in the beginning of a renaissance down there of energy. With this shale development, OGEEP, Ohio Energy Educational Program, has estimated that the shale development will create about 204,000 jobs over the next 5 years, with about $34 billion in investment just over in eastern Ohio. Now, Ohio State, as you read in the dispatch yesterday, one of their road professors said that it would only create 20,000 jobs. I will touch on that later, but I should note that Ohio State was one of our partners in the study that OGEEP released, as well as Cleveland State and Marietta College. These were all vetted by those three institutions. This professor was vetted by a graduate assistant that he had. So I will touch on that later because it is quite funny. But what we're seeing over in eastern Ohio is, it's great. You know, with shale production, I'm not sure the education you guys have on it. What we really have is shale production, the Utica Shale, that is really the big portion of this play. You have the Marcellus Shale that's over in the far eastern region of Ohio. So what we have here in the eastern Ohio, the Utica Shale. The Utica Shale is essentially the source rock from all oil and natural gas that we have seen in the history of Ohio. Ohio is the first state to actually drill for oil, which just happened because they were looking for salt. You know, just they ended up coming up with it. They were looking for salt to cure their meats. Next thing they had was a bubbling crude. I guess you could say, but. It is a source rock, and what makes it so exciting is, you know, you had the Clinton sandstone and the Berea sandstone, and that was conventional drilling back in the 1900s, all the way through for the past 130 years, actually. What we have seen now is they always knew that the oil came from the Utica Shale and the natural gas, but they never knew how to tap into that resource. But now with the advent of horizontal drilling, which is the huge component of this shale development, utilized with that and hydraulic fracturing, which is taking a fine sand and water, 99.5% sand and water, with about 0.5% chemicals used for lubrication and killing the bacteria, shoots it into the rock sideways, horizontally, and fractures the rock open, releasing these carbons that were trapped there for millions of years. When you have this hydraulic fracturing, what you have is the oil and the natural gas, they want to flow to the path of least resistance. That's just the natural occurrence. So it flows right through the bore head and straight up the drill. It is very exciting. But of course you have environmentalists and some of the liberals, they want to stop this. They don't want to see fossil fuels see a resurgent in America or in Ohio. What you have now is a push by some of these people trying to ban hydraulic fracturing. Which is funny because hydraulic fracturing has been around since 1953 in Ohio. Actually started first in Stark County. There have been 85,000 wells in Ohio utilized, drilled, and stimulated with hydraulic fracturing, over 1.2 million in the United States, with zero groundwater contamination. And as you'll see, you have these people talking about lighting faucets on fire and talking about poisoning the groundwater. Well, to counter that point, Lisa Jackson, EPA administrator, no friend to any industry, testified before Congress here, it was last spring. Her testimony said, there has not been one single confirmed case of groundwater contamination by hydraulic fracturing, although we continue to look. That is her quote, not mine. Scott Kell, who was a former assistant director of ODNR, and is just for Ohio-based, who's also the director of the Groundwater Protection Council, testified before Congress in May of '09, said, in Ohio we have never had one case of groundwater contamination caused by hydraulic fracturing. But yet, these environmentalists will stop at nothing to make sure that they can tie it and use emotion to try to control the situation because they only want to see a renewable energy. You know, renewable energy is great. I mean, you know, everybody wants to see renewable energy. It's an added bonus. It's another spoke in the wheel. It's another piece of the puzzle. I mean, we need all the energy we can get. But in reality, renewables, by 2035, we're going to see 7% of our energy coming from renewable energy. The rest is going to be made up by coal and oil and gas. That is what you have to have. But these people would rather have us living in huts and not have air conditioning. And I kind of want to tell them that 20% of all power generation is used by computers. So as they're kind of blogging away that, how horrible energy is, they think energy comes from an outlet. They don't understand where it really comes from. but I digress. So with this hydraulic fracturing, we have natural gas that is coming down to historic lows. It's at a 10-year low right now. But what really makes this exciting is the oil factor. What I have recently just learned, we knew oil was part of this the whole time. Again, it was the source rock. But the API gravity level, I don't want to talk science, so I'm just going to say that it is very high at that point. It's a 42. It is equivalent to Libyan crude. What that means is, this isn't the tar sands oil that's coming out of California that you use for asphalt, which we need greatly. But this is energy that you can run America on. It's all the power that you get from the Middle East without the conflict and without having to deal with all these tyrannical leaders. And that's what we need in Ohio. And has nothing to do with even jobs that are going to be created. And I will touch upon that now with the study that the road professor, I like to call him, he stated 20,000 jobs will only be created. I find that interesting because there's a lot of stories that have come out here recently. One of the biggest, I guess I could just say yesterday, over in Zanesville, Ohio, Halliburton is moving back to Ohio. They're creating 300 jobs right off the bat, right in Zanesville, Ohio. That's just one component. That has nothing to do with drilling. Then you also have the resurgence of steel. We never thought we were going to see steel back in Ohio. I mean, that was a dead industry. People always talked about maybe steel will come back. But you have B&M Star up in Youngstown. They have invested about $600 million in just one plant to do threaded steel made specifically for drilling. Not only B&M Star, you have Republic Steel up in Lorain. They closed down that steel plant here about 3 or 4 years ago. They moved all of those jobs down to Canton because they had a dated furnace that just didn't make sense economically. They had to run 24-hour days, so they said they had to shut it down, move the jobs down to Canton. They never thought those jobs were coming back. They have now reopened that plant. They're adding 600 jobs. They have a new electric arc furnace, and they're making threaded piping specifically for shale exploration. Another one, U.S. Steel in Lorain again, and it's just going to keep going. Aerial Corporation, if anybody's familiar with that, great corporation out of Mount Vernon. Once shale production started ramping up, they had to actually move their offices and build another plant in Canton, Ohio, directly related to shale production. They do compressors for the oil and gas industry. So, when you hear this, all these 20,000 jobs, that's it. Well, we're in the first year of this. We're still kind of in the planning phase, the exploration phase, and these are the jobs that are already kind of ramping up. But I guess I should also talk about the jobs that are going to be surrounding these communities, and that's what gets exciting. You have these people coming in. This is highly specialized industry. So for the first few years, we don't have a workforce developed. So what we have is essentially, we're going to have some people coming in, but what that means is hotels are going to be booked, solid. Hotel tax, room tax, that's going to be generated in those local communities. You can barely get a hotel room in Cambridge, Ohio right now. Carroll County, there's not a hotel room to be seen. Mike, you were in St. Clairsville here on Monday. There are no hotels there. They're booking solid. But when these guys are here, what do? They get a per diem. They get $200 a day per diem. What do you do with that? You go and spend it in your local economy. And that money is going to be generated around. Now there's also ad valorem tax. It's on shale exploration, oil and gas exploration, 1%. That's estimated to generate about $1 billion per year in just by 2014, 2015. That is just for local governments and and the areas. Well, that's some jobs that are going to be created in those local governments. Then you have to look at what we have here is, we have oil and gas, and it's very similar with coal. We had that time when the workforce in Ohio was about 50 years old, average. And you do have no mid-range. People weren't really getting into it at the moment. Now we have to create this workforce. But what you have is a pipeline development. So we're going to have to develop pipelines for this brand new technology that's coming through. With this high pressure that's coming through, we have to build larger pipes. We have natural gas, and then out of that we have the wet gas. The wet gas is the ethane, the propane, the methane, and then you also have crude oil. You have to pipe it somewhere. I mean, we can get all the stuff out of the ground, but if it's just kind of sitting there stagnant, it's not going to really help us at all. So we're going to have to build these pipelines. The Rex pipeline came through Guernsey County 2 years ago, created a huge economic impact in the Guernsey County, Muskegon County area. So these are jobs that are going to be created. Pipeline's going to be huge. Welding jobs are going to be another issue. We have to get the welding jobs out there. They have been, since everything kind of took a downturn, they have been needing jobs. Forestry, they're going to have to clear the land. But not only that, the National Association of Manufacturers just released a study last week, which I trust a little bit more than the guy from Ohio State, that has 600,000 jobs currently just from the Bakken Shale and the Marcellus Shale, tied directly to shale industry because of the lowering energy costs. But now what we actually have, when I mentioned the wet gas earlier, wet gas is very important to the chemical industry. You take that wet gas and all of that, the butane, the methane, the propane, and you take it down to a cracker. A cracker is what strips essentially all of the molecules out of the natural gas, the wet gas, and breaks them down so they can go be sent to the chemical plants. A cracker that is rumored to be placed, well, it will be placed in either West Virginia, Pennsylvania, or Ohio. Right in that panhandle there by Wheeling, Weirton, the Pennsylvania area, and then also St. Clairsville, Martins Ferry areas where they're looking. Dilly's Bottom area, if you're familiar. That right there will be, to construct a cracker is 13,000 jobs. And for a cracker to run, it takes about 16,000 jobs. Just the cracker itself is almost as many, the cracker itself between construction and from, running the cracker is more than that gentleman's study. So, I mean, again, these things, when I read that, I just kind of just laughed to myself. So, I mean, we are in the beginning of essentially a renaissance, and this is going to be interesting. When you have lower fuel prices, you have manufacturing. During the early 1900s, we were one of the greatest economies in the United States, and it wasn't because of our weather. It wasn't because we had ocean views and mountains. It was because this is where the oil was. This is where the energy was. This is where the coal was. This is why you had steel. This is why you had manufacturing. So with lower fuel prices, it brings investment, and that investment is going to be moving here. So what we have essentially is essentially, I mean, this is going to be the greatest thing that we're going to see in Ohio in years. No, yes.
I have a friend of mine who's familiar with what's going on up in North Dakota, and they're doing a lot of the oil fracking up there. Because water is so scarce in North Dakota, they're actually starting to recycle the water that they use up there. In Ohio, we don't have a shortage of water, so there would be no need to recycle the water. But would it be something that would be good to do anyways when the water that's used in this fracking process?
Yes, yeah, for that. Actually, most of these companies, Anadarko, Chesapeake, the companies that are kind of moving in, you have Hess, Chesapeake, Anadarko, Exxon, I'm trying to think of a few other, I mean, there's Consol Energy, of course, as well. These larger companies, best use practice is what they use. They recycle all their water. So when it comes back up, just from where they're at, I mean, you have to truck this water in. So just to, you don't want to have so many trucks coming up to these properties every single time giving you fresh water. So they're going to continually recycle this water and then pump it back in and mix it with the fresh water. So that is how they're going to make the most of the commodities they're going to have. And then also what you're going to have is, I talked with some of the municipalities over there. I work a lot with the local officials over there, and they're working with these companies to run water lines to get to their areas, just to kind of fill up the pumping stations at the shale exploration. Well, these water lines are going to be left for the people in those communities to use afterwards. And I believe I probably went over a little bit, so I guess I should introduce Mike Carey. Mike Carey, I should say, is my former boss and I guess a close friend and my mentor. So if I did anything horrible today, I blame it on him for his teaching. So.
It's always interesting to listen to, and Sean's doing a fantastic job for Energy in Depth. But one thing that you have to look at is that all this job creation in Eastern Ohio, all the idea of the spin-off jobs, the fact that the steel industry is actually moving back into the state of Ohio, the fact that for the first time ever, you're seeing 300 jobs by Halliburton announced in Zanesville. What is one thing that you never heard Sean mention the entire time he spoke?
Government.
Government. And what else didn't he say?
Unions.
Well, with unions, we don't know about that. But you never heard him mention the stimulus.
Yeah.
Not $1. of this massive growth, which is going to change Eastern Ohio, is coming from President Obama's energy stimulus package. Now, we hear 300 jobs coming into Zanesville, Ohio. You know, I'm sure that there were folks in Zanesville that were really excited about the opportunity to possibly get some of that stimulus money to create a solar company. But just ask the folks that were behind Solyndra and see how that worked out for them. These are going to be paying jobs. Look, what I'm here to talk about today is, you heard the bio, and obviously I represent Ohio's coal mining industry. Ohio has roughly 250 years of coal reserves left. In the state of Ohio, about 87% of all of our electricity is generated from coal-based utilities. Now, according to the Obama administration, they're going to do everything they possibly can to make sure that that goes down. And along the way, as they lessen the reliance on coal power, what do you think is going to happen? Costs are going to go up. There's no doubt about it. I want to talk a couple things today because I think it's important where we are today and where we're going in the future. First off, you all remember the climate change debate with Waxman-Markey and the Kerry-Boxer bill, correct? Cap and trade bill. The interesting part about that is when the president was coming into office, in fact, I was testifying before Congress, and the plain dealer, which is generally not a big fan of mine, actually did a political fact check on me. And when they did their political check, they were checking the fact that I said Barack Obama said that he was going to bankrupt the coal industry by causing, you know, energy prices to necessarily skyrocket. I referred to him, unfortunately, and I got an A- for my political fact check. So, Joan, you know, watch my remarks, make sure I keep everything right. I got an A-. You know why I got an A-? Because I referred to him as President Obama and not Senator Obama when he actually made those remarks. So the fact is this administration clearly knew what they were going to do. The attack wasn't just going to be on the coal industry, it wasn't just going to be on the oil and gas industry, it was going to be on a way of life. So they came into office and they had a very sympathetic Congress. They had Nancy Pelosi as Speaker, they had Harry Reid as President of the Senate. They tried to work through a bill on cap and trade. Obviously it passed through the House. Many of the folks that voted on that piece of legislation lost their jobs, thank heavens. So the fact was, the Senate got a little scared, so the Senate didn't pass it. I'm going to read something to you real quick, because I think it's, if I can find it, right after the bill had failed, President Obama went into Rolling Stone magazine. Okay, this is after cap and trade failed. In Rolling Stone magazine, and he said, and I quote, "One of my top priorities next year is to have an energy policy that begins to address all facets of the over-reliance of fossil fuels. We may end up having to do it in chunks as opposed to some sort of comprehensive omnibus legislation," which is what they tried to do. So, cap and trade fails. What's the next step? All of a sudden, Lisa Jackson, who when she was the EPA administrator for the state of Delaware, do you know what she did? She made sure that she put an amendment in their state constitution, but in the governor's office, mandated that no coal power plant would be built in the state of Delaware. So it's no surprise where she's coming from. So right after cap and trade fails, they issue what's called the Boiler Mac. The Boiler Mac, very dangerous for Ohio's steel industry, very dangerous for Ohio manufacturing. So they propose the Boiler Mac. Then they propose the Utility Mac, which will go into effect next year. And then, and Sean, you remember this, we're sitting in the office, we've been fighting the Boiler Mac, we've been fighting the Utility Mac. All of a sudden, one of our operators calls and says to Sean, he goes, what is this about Casper? Remember that? We tried to Google it. We had no idea what Casper was. Casper is the cross-state air pollution rule, but it was the transport rule. But because the transport rule wasn't selling in the press and it wasn't selling in the legislature, they decided to change the name. So now you had the Utility Mac, the Boiler Mac, the Casper rule, and then, because mining coal is so destructive to the American society, according to President Barack Obama, he's going to put together the Stream Buffer Zone Variance Rule. Now, by doing the stream buffer zone variance rule means that you can't mine coal out of the ground. 90% of all coal reserves that are, particularly here in Ohio, would be eliminated from even being part of the energy mix. So, let's revisit where we are. He said what he was going to do when he was nominated, or before he was nominated, was unable to get cap and trade, so he went into Rolling Stone magazine and said, we're not going to do it comprehensively, we're going to do it piecemeal. And folks, that's what this president has done. And it's to the detriment of all of you. And the reason is because he believes in redesigning the economy in the way that he wants the economy. You've heard probably often people talk about green energy jobs, okay? And the reason we have to have these green energy jobs, the reason is it's working in Europe, okay? I just want some people. It's working in Europe, or at least in all of the European countries. Hey, China's doing it. We ought to too. It's the future. It's the new technology. We just need to change a little bit so we can compete in these world markets. We must win the race on green energy because we're losing it. It's growing. It means jobs. And it reduces the emissions and, of course, climate change. The funny thing was, Stanley Greenberg, who was an advisor to President Clinton, after all this happened, all of the cap and trade, he actually said, and I quote, advice on the proposal, he said, except the, oh, here it is. The folks do not like the words global warming or cap and trade. So I advise that we change our directive to a clean energy economy and the fact that we are doing these things to bring on more green jobs. They knew that they had lost the war of the words with what they really were, so they thought they would change it. Now, I will say this, the German folks, after all the debacle with the climate change, this is one thing that the German, who's the head of the renewable side, this guy's name, Endenhofer, said, quote, one has to free oneself from the illusion that international climate policy is environmental policy. Did you hear that? One has to free oneself from the illusion that international climate policy is environmental policy. Climate change policy is about how we redistribute de facto the world's wealth.
Right.
Folks, that's what we got. And that's what you're going to get with these Caspers, the MACs, the stream buffer zone variants. And you know, and Sean will tell you, I've been all over the United States over the last 2 years talking about this. We have to stop it now. And we have to stop this administration now. I think I'm right at 15 minutes, so I know we were going to open up for questions for both of us, so I'll end it there, but how do we want to do the questions? Okay, well, I've got a lot of hands up, so I guess I'll just start picking them. How about I start there?
Yes, sir. I do not believe that carbon dioxide is pollution. I don't believe that.
It's the baseline nutrient of the food chain, so I appreciate your comments on that.
But I am concerned about mercury, arsenic, and
No doubt
other
about
heavy
it.
metals that are in coal. And I'd like to clarify, I mean, the biggest environmental problem we have in the world is the mercury in the oceans, and they are right now advising pregnant women not to have more than 1 serving of tuna if you're pregnant. That's a FDA advisory right now. To what degree does the burning of coal contribute to the mercury in the waters of the ocean?
If I'm not mistaken, and I may not have these figures exactly right, and so if I'm on YouTube, I could be wrong, but I believe 99 or 95% of all mercury emissions are man-made. To percentage, I think it's 0.005% of the mercury that are in the water come actually from coal power plants. But mercury is something that is free floating. So no matter, and we have mercury reduction in this country it's just a lot like carbon in the sense that we scrub, we clean, we have the cleanest power plants in the world. But when you have other countries that simply aren't going to clean their power plants, but actually, to be honest with you, China has cleaned power plants now. You want to know why? Well, they can burn. They can actually build them. They can get a permit to actually build a coal-fired power plant. Try to do that here in Ohio. But good question. But it's minimal.
Well, where does the mercury come from in the ocean? It's in the ocean.
It can come from anything. I mean, mercury is a natural element. There are different forms of mercury. Now, I'm not a scientist, but I can tell you, coal-fired power plants, it's minimal. and your hand went up first.
Yeah, I was reading a periodical called Governing, December of this year.
Yeah.
And there's some interesting information here. The Obama administration promised 5 million high-paying green jobs. As of right now, the third quarter of 2010, they've produced 225,000 jobs. The other thing, there's a Princeton University economics professor who was the former Federal Reserve Vice Chairman. Interesting name, by the way, Alan Blinder.
Typecasting.
He said that part of the problem has almost certainly been the failure of the federal government to raise the price of carbon-based fuels, just what you were talking about, through either a carbon tax or with a cap and trade system. Most experts agree that without raising the price of carbon-based fuels, it's going to be hard to jumpstart the clean economy, especially with recent discoveries of massive deposits of cheap natural gas. Most people will simply gravitate to the cheapest source of energy. And one other last thing. I sent a letter supporting clean coal in Ohio and the natural gas over in eastern Ohio and northern Ohio, and I had a response from Sherrod Brown. And I'll just read the last paragraph. As environmental legislation continues to be discussed in Congress, I will work to ensure that an unfair burden is not placed on Ohio families and businesses. During this time of economic turmoil, we must ensure that our environmental goals serve as catalysts to create new jobs and economic opportunities across Ohio. You can read through that, I'm sure. Thank you.
Great, great. And I should point out, in 2008, to go to what you were saying, Secretary Chu actually said, and this is in 2008, quote, "Somehow we have to figure out how to boost the price of gasoline to the levels of that in Europe." So, Secretary Chu.
Well, they have mass transit.
Correct, correct.
Me?
Yes.
I understand that we use a lot of coal and there's a lot of good things about it, but they send people down in the ground and then something happens and then they get stuck or hurt. And it just seems to me that with all our computers and robotics and whatnot, can't they make it safe to mine coal? Can't they, mechanize it, roboticize it, whatever?
Well, I can tell you that if you're looking at coal mining, the production per man hour, I think it's 40 tons a day, 40 man, I forget what the number is, but we're producing more coal in the state of Ohio than we did in 1950, but we're using 1/10 of the employment force, so it is becoming heavily mechanized. The issue that you see a lot is, it's kind of like, and unfortunate as this is, when you have a coal mining accident, it's almost like an airplane accident. They're very, very rare. We have not had a fatality in an underground coal mine, I believe, in 12 years in Ohio. And it's a relatively safe process. The numbers that you see with a lot of the deaths, they actually come in nations such as China, India, and Russia, where they simply do not have the MSHA laws that govern to make sure that mining is safe. So it is very safe, and actually in many cases much safer than agriculture. Yes, sir.
Does the Canadian pipeline impact any of your plans?
The Canadian pipeline, I think, again, a rising tide raises all ships, and when you have a pipeline, that pipeline has to be made with something, and what's that usually made from? It's usually made from steel. And how do you fabricate steel? You have to have lots of energy, and what is the best energy and the cheapest cost is coal. So, you have to continue to grow the economy. This shale exploration that Sean's part of now, there are folks that like to say, well, we'll create all this natural gas and we can somehow shut down the coal power plants. That's simply not going to happen. The fact is that the price of coal is very stable. The price of gas fluctuates a lot more. And the fact is that you need all things. And that's, nobody that is a true believer in the free market believes that you should somehow mandate certain percentages of anything. Let the free market decide. If natural gas is working, if oil is working, if coal is working, if nuclear is working. we need an all but the above approach. So, not really. So, yes, sir.
My question's for Mr. Bennett.
Yep.
So you mentioned that there were no cases of groundwater contamination.
Mm-hmm.
What has been used to almost galvanize a portion of the public against the fracking process? Is there something that, an accident or something that the DEPA has latched onto that's done this?
Hang on.
One part that I wanted to touch on, because that is really what we need everybody for, all the supporters, because the environmentalists, they are relentless. They will sit there and write letters to the editors daily. They will sit there and have, I saw a protest with 200 people up in Youngstown that want to say, you're going to dirty our water and our wells and our faucets are going to catch on fire. They watch this movie Gasland by Josh Fox. That's where most of these people come from. Or they read these blogs by the Greenies that they use emotion. Emotion sells, facts don't.
That's right. And
that's the problem. So what happens is they show this picture on this Gasland movie, and I'm sure many of you have seen it by these environmentalists. They light the faucet on fire. It makes for great TV, and they said, this is what natural gas exploration did to my water. Well, no, that makes for good TV. The problem is, if anybody's ever lived in rural communities, you drill a water well, you're going to have methane. And you can go all through eastern Ohio, you can go through New York, you can go through areas where you're not drilling for gas, and you can light water faucets on fire before oil and gas production was even done there. It's called drift gas. Methane comes up through the areas. And that gentleman in that Josh Fox movie, Gasland, that I mentioned, that lit the faucet on fire, that was over in Colorado. And the Oil and Gas Commission in Colorado went there because they saw it and they felt genuinely concerned. I mean, they have to take these things seriously. They went there and found that, actually, they went there prior to. That's the funny part. They went there prior to, and they tested it. It was biogenic gas. Each natural gas has a fingerprint, essentially. There's no one the same. So thermogenic is what's created if you drill for natural gas, because you have to release the pressure and it comes up. Drift gas is biogenic. It's something that just after eons it kind of lifts up, and you can find drift gas in water wells, 100 feet down. It's just naturally occurring. So they said, no, sir, this is just naturally occurring. This has nothing to do with natural gas exploration. Josh Fox went in, decided this was too good of a story, put it in the movie, and then everybody thinks everybody's faucets are going to catch on fire. So they're using emotion and not truth. And Josh Fox got cornered on that up in Chicago here not too long ago. And they brought up that question. And he said, well, it wasn't important to my argument. So I didn't want to put in the part that Denver Oil and Gas Commission said this wasn't fact. He said, in 1937, there was an issue alerted in New York City that said there is a serious issue with faucets catching on fire from the New York water plants. And people in New York City were lighting faucets on fire.
Specifically answer his question of, what is the government doing to help the environmentalists? I mean, does the EPA have programs that...
No, what they do, what the biggest thing that the federal government is doing is not saying anything. Right. They try to make sure that they keep this under wraps because they want to make sure that fossil fuels are taken out. Coal, natural gas, everything.
Got some other questions in the back, someone? Dr. Wagner.
Thanks for coming out here, by the way. Phenomenal presentation. This is so timely. I also just want to get a quick plug-in. Mike's in the documentary, Changing Climate and Global Warming. If you want to see what a hoax this science is, watch this documentary. But I was hoping that it's the Changing Climate and Global Warming. Sean, if you would have been around, I would have got you in there. But it's available on Amazon. I was going to give you this copy. They just recently shut down. I'm really interested in the coal to liquids and the gas, the coal to liquid and the gas to liquid. And my understanding is Baird was trying to do one of those plants up in Columbiana, and they were able to shut it down. And from I was wondering if you'd comment on that. And also, I understand the lung association's coming out against you guys now. I was wondering if you'd make a comment on that.
I should talk about Bart because now they have turned it in from a natural gas to liquids plant is what they're going for instead of coal. That's temporarily until the Sierra Club ends up doing a lawsuit on that. So they have a Beyond Coal campaign, and I saw them at an anti-rally, and their next one is Beyond Oil and Beyond Natural Gas. So it's pretty soon it's going to be Beyond Habitable Living in the wintertime here in Ohio.
beyond?
Yeah, the BART Energy Project, just so everybody's understand, coal to liquids is a concept. You remember the Battle of the Bulge in World War II, where Germany had depleted pretty much all of its oil reserves and had to use the energy the energy product that they actually had in their country. So they used Dr. Fischer-Tropsch in the 1920s developed Fischer-Tropsch. Fischer-Tropsch technology essentially makes coal to liquids, and they could run their tanks, and that's what fueled Germany during the Battle of the Bulge. So anyway, this is not new technology, it's very old. The problem is that for the environmental community and those that are a firm believer that carbon is the problem that is destroying the world from within, the amount of carbon that is generated from taking coal and making a liquid form from coal, that process is carbon intensive, and then ultimately you will be burning still another carbon-based fuel, and therefore you have two sets of carbon emissions. So Secretary Chu would have nothing to do with coal to liquid plants, and so that's why BART decided to go to the natural gas. But again, I think Sean's correct. That's a temporary thing. As far as the Lung Association, yeah, the Lung Association has some funding from some folks, and that funding from those folks is being targeted for coal-fired power plant to get it out of the mix. Yes, ma'am.
I've been in the commercial construction business for years and years and involved heavily in the design side of things, so heard forever, oh, renewable energy, we need to get there, blah, blah, blah. I recently became a USGBC LEED certified associate, green associate. I'm embarrassed to say it, but it's for business purposes. But the point is, in studying for this certification, it became very clear in the study materials that the plan was that we were all going to be living in tall 1,500 square foot apartment buildings in certain areas of the country.
That's right.
And
Agenda 21.
That's exactly
yeah,
right.
exactly. And it's, I mean, again, I didn't even know about Agenda 21 when I was studying for this. But the other thing that I have become aware of through other industry presentations is the lack of it's like solar energy and its efficiency. I mean, the reality is that solar energy, in my understanding, is a very inefficient process of creating energy to the extent that it's like they're trying to get, you know, 5% efficiency or 10% efficiency, and the fact that its life cycle for the technology now is very short. So I mean, if you invest in solar energy at this point, essentially you're throwing your money down the drain.
Gahanna City Schools is
Just
a pig bait. In the This Week article yesterday, yesterday's paper.
Can you comment on the efficiencies of the other green energy resources?
I think, I probably can, but just a couple of things. I was looking up as when Sean was answering a question, I was looking up some figures. I think the Washington Times, or Washington Post, Washington Times is generally okay. Washington Post is kind of like the New York Times. Not a real bastion of thoughtful free market economic thought. But they did a study, and the cost of all of the green jobs under this Obama administration's, the giveaways to the Greens, the giveaways to Solar, Solyndra, the average job created under this policy, I believe, cost the American taxpayers a total of $455,000. So per job. So to go to the energy efficiency, there are certain aspects of any form of energy that makes sense. Solar panels can be, you know, if you want to install them on your house and heat your water tank and you live in Arizona, that's probably not a bad idea.
I know a house like that.
And it works.
Right.
The problem is when you're looking at base load generation. A dear friend of Sean and mine, Dave Daniels, who is a state senator from Hillsborough, actually Greenfield, Ohio. Dave went out to a committee of state legislators that met in Portland, Oregon, and they had the opportunity to actually tour a solar panel manufacturing facility. Now, Dave is a guy, my brother used to bale hay for him and with his father, and So Dave's a common sense guy from Highland County. And so Dave goes to the guy that's giving him the tour of this solar factory. He said, this is fantastic. I'm really excited about these jobs. This is great. He said, is there any way you can show me the solar panel that you've got that's running this factory? Dave said, the guy looked at him and said, oh, there's no way we could have a solar panel that get the energy for this factory. So I think there's levels of practicality. I mean, certainly there's certain aspects of wind, certain aspects of solar that work, but do you have anything on that?
I guess I can make a short little announcement, little fact that for solar panels, it would take Arizona, which is very bright and sunny, you'd have to cover the entire state, 75% of the state to power Arizona with solar power. That wouldn't make for very good, well, I don't think you can sell the land after that time. Yes.
As a follow-up to what you were saying, I went to Wright Pat Air Force Base. There's a big push for all government installations to be energy efficient, renewable energy by certain criteria by certain years. The folks at Wright Pat, their electric bill comes in at a gigawatt, not kilowatt, and as a result, Duke Energy is nice enough to give them a really low rate. They can't beat that rate with solar or wind. As far as energy or water efficiency, water recycling, they sit on one of the largest aquifers in the entire state. Their water costs are nothing. As far as, a windmill at the end of the runway is problematic. And not to mention the fact that some of the buildings there was a guy named Orville and Wilbur, built the buildings, not really energy efficient, and those buildings are still being used, and these guys are being made, they're not allowed to touch them because they're hysterical. I'm sorry.
They are hysterical.
But they are supposed to make them energy efficient. So how do you take an envelope that was built by Orville and Wilbur and make it energy efficient and increase your efficiencies every year? And what he pointed out was, he said, every year my budget is this. And he says my budget gets cut every year, and of course my energy costs go down they go up every year. And he says, so what happens is I have maintenance and I have operations in my budget. I do no maintenance and everything goes to operations because my budget gets cut every year because I'm supposed to be more and more efficient. I'm sitting on the largest aquifer. I get gigawatts for pennies on the dollar, of everybody else. And he says I can't be any more efficient than I am. And what's happening is he's not maintaining his equipment, which, as we know, skip an oil change every once in a while with your car. It runs more inefficient. So he says what they're being forced to do, and this is just one Air Force base with one guy who has a pretty good knowledge of what's going on there. And this was at a conference sponsored by Wright Pat and sponsored by Sammy that he's explaining the realities of what the budget constraints are doing to him and his facilities. This stuff is being jammed down his throat. And the other thing is, he said, life cycle costing. He says, I have to life cycle cost everything over 20 years. A solar panel useful life is 10 to 15 years. He says, so I have to take a 20-year loan out for a panel that's going to be no good in 10 to 15 years. I'll be paying for it for the last 5 years of its life, and it won't be functional. And he goes, I can go on and on and on, but they're going to cut me off here shortly. And he just had example after example why the renewable stuff doesn't work in some cases. In Florida, in Arizona, in places where they don't have these things, that's great. Fill the desert with solar panels. But again, those people have a problem because the wind and the sand comes through and blisters them. And then they lose the efficiency. It's a great idea, and it's kind of an all of the above.
Real quick on that, I just want to follow up on this, and I'm assuming that you're talking about Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and this is somebody that's a government, work for the government. Okay, so when he's talking about this is costing him, what does that actually mean to this crowd in this room? It's costing you, okay? Every time you have a renewable mandate that's passed on to a federal facility and it actually is costing that federal facility more, it's costing you more. Let the free market, let the free market work. This is a concept they think that they're going to somehow legislate into prosperity. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, along those lines, as you know, someone got to the state legislators a while back and instituted a state law that said that the power generation units in the state must have some attainable goal. I think it was 12% from green alternate sources. How did that happen, and do you have any plans to nuke that? Because that's just complete BS.
Well, okay. Sean's laughing because we actually, and sorry we were a little bit late, we grabbed coffee. Yeah, I used to see this guy every day, and you know, he's been traveling southeastern, eastern Ohio, so we had a few minutes this morning to catch up. We actually had a hearing before the Public Utilities Committee, and I brought in, how many, you ever heard of Deneen Borelli? She's a regular contributor on Fox. She's on the Great American panel. But anyway, I had Deneen Borelli come in. She's with Project 21, and she's African American. She talked about how the higher fuel costs disproportionately affect minority communities. Okay, we had a guy by the name of Chris Horner, who's with CEI, the Competitive Enterprise Institute, talk about how crazy some of these, you know, trying to model the United States after Belgium or China or, you know, Spain for that matter. And then we had Gene Trisco from the United Mine Workers come in. They actually talked about green jobs and what it actually does to workforce development. So the fact is, yes, and they're in hearings on that now. It's 12.5% renewable, 12.5% advanced energy standard. The advanced energy standard is clean coal, but you have to have carbon sequestration, meaning they have to put carbon into the ground, carbon dioxide into the ground, and then advanced nuclear for whatever that means. It won't happen. The utilities know it can't happen. First Energy doesn't care because First Energy has gone to a free market approach. They're going to compete in the marketplace. If the price of energy goes up, you're going to pay more. AEP does care a little bit because they're still kind of in a quasi-regulated state. So the fact is, no matter what happens, the mandates happen, you pay more. We are trying to address it.
Yes, I mean, that's exactly right. We introduced a bill, Senator Chris Jordan introduced our bill trying to repeal that. What was that, back in August? Yep. And that's still moving forward, hopefully. Actually, the gentleman in the back has been having his hand up for a while.
You mentioned, I heard Arizona. And I'm from Arizona, so when you mentioned solar panels working there was an airport back in 2000 that set up solar panels to run their airport. They were going to go off the grid. When they did the presentation, they talked about how they would be able to sell the extra power back to the utility company. Well, it's now 2011. They have never, ever gone off of the grid. They've always supplemented. The cost of replacement due to sand damage, dirt damage, and sun damage to the panels have actually kept them in the red. They have never paid for their solar panel just to power their airport. And this is sitting in the valley where the sun shines all the time. So it doesn't even work out there.
Yeah, they don't really think forward on that. They think in the now.
I'm afraid that we're about out of time. But one of the reasons that Joan and I brought these guys in is because I feel, and I think Joan agrees with me, that this coming election cycle through 2012, what happens to us as far as energy is concerned in the state of Ohio is going to be a key element of who we need to get in office. And I want you guys to take just a couple of minutes and respond to this, but two areas that we need to think about ideologically is, are we okay with using up the natural resources in the state of Ohio to provide our energy sources? Or should we use wind and air? The second thing is, how is this going to affect you, your children, and your grandchildren in your wallet? Are your electric bills going to go up, or are they going to go down? How far are they going to go up? I've heard numbers that your electric bill could triple. Do you believe that this could happen? Yeah. I've heard estimates that your gasoline is going to go to $5 a gallon. If we don't do something to stop the government regulators, and I think these guys can probably speak to those numbers specifically. What's going to happen to our electric bill in the next 2 years if we don't do something? You got 4 minutes.
All right, I'll be quick.
You should be able to handle that, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. The election is extremely important. You know, you have to elect leaders who have common sense approach to energy security, and that's what this is. We have to have cheap, affordable, reliable electricity because we need to power America. We need to power manufacturing. That is what we do. And as far as, you know, the environmentalists, a lot of the liberals, they believe in only green energy. And they've been very vocal about that. We need to, as a whole, push back on them. And what we have on our side are facts. And that is what I go around the state talking about, are the facts, the studies. Penn State did a study here just 2 months ago saying out of 200 groundwater tests they did, 200 wells they tested that Marcellus Shale, not one single one of them was contaminated. But yet the environmentalists will sit there and say, no, you're going to poison the groundwater. Well, that invokes emotion, and those people are loud. So we need to push back on them and say, no, this is a perfectly safe practice. And I encourage you all to get on ODNR's website. And actually, I'll make a plug for Energy in Depth. You get on eidohio.org is our state website, who I work for. We have a library that has a bunch of studies, all of them done by either universities or the federal government. No industry. So that is one portion. What was the second portion, I guess?
How's it going to affect our wallets?
How's it going to affect our wallets? Well, compressed natural gas is a possibility for this new shale play, as far as mobilizing our fleets, our state fleets, our cars. But if we stop drilling for oil in America, well, we're going to see prices of Europe. We're going to see $6 a gallon gasoline. If we don't utilize these supplies, we sit there and just give our money to dictators over in the Middle East, or we give them down to South America to people who don't like us. So in essence, do you want to have American-born energy that's done by us, that's going to keep the price low? Right now, from just the North Dakota shale play, we actually keep the price of oil coming out of America $20 a barrel cheaper than what it is over in Europe. That's just one state. That's before we even drill here in Ohio. So if that's how much it affects. So in Ohio, we can affect that another $10, $20, $30. That's going to go directly back in your pocket.
Okay, I'm going to tell you, as far as the election goes, look, I mean, you got to make that decision yourself. I would think that you would already have it made. I think anybody that believes in an economy that is free market based, that believes in making sure that you have the right to make a determination on what you want to spend for energy, how you want to spend that money, on what energy source. Look, you go into I live in Granville, okay? And generally not the bastion of conservative thought when you're going through town. I can assure you that. My car is marked. But I will tell you this, when I go into the grocery store, there are like 5 different milks, okay? You can make a determination on what you want to spend. If you want, we used to have a dairy that was up in Johnstown, outside of Johnstown. He would bring glass bottles. The milk was basically fresh, and you could recycle. Now, it was expensive, but if that was a choice you wanted to make, more power to you. And it's the same way with energy. If you want to be able to spend money for an all-solar house, an all-renewable energy grid, you ought to be able to have that choice. Amen. But it should not be mandated. As far as this election goes and what you're talking about, look, folks, it's real simple. There are some that believe in re-engineering or redistributing wealth and re-engineering the way that America operates. You got to make your decision based upon who you want. I know who I won't be voting for. I'm not sure who I will be voting for yet, but I know who I won't be voting for. Yes, sir.
Is there any of the Republican candidates that scare you or are very well? I mean, they all scare us, but
that's a loaded question.
Are least friendly to
the energy
question?
Yeah, I'll tell you what. I mean, I think the best example. I think and I know that Glenn Beck has been calling Newt Gingrich a progressive, and I do like the fact that he actually admitted that sitting on the couch was the stupidest thing he ever did in his life with Nancy Pelosi. I like the fact that he was at least truthful with that. When you look at Huntsman, I think Huntsman's out to lunch, and it's not just on that. I like so much that Ron Paul has to say, but I got to tell you, folks, we are going to have to deal with the Middle East, and I don't care what anybody says. And believe me, when I go to CPAC, the guy that gets the biggest, loudest applause is Ron Paul. Okay? He has the most fanatical followers, and they're great. And I believe a lot of the things on the economic side make sense. But we've got issues, and we've got to make sure that we're protected on those issues. So, Mitt Romney, the governor is, he's good. He's kind of waffled over the years. I got to go. Anybody on those Fox debates or those debates would be better than what we have now. That's all I have.
How about it? All right, we got just a couple of things. One, I want to remind you that Carol, hold up your hand. Rob, hold up your hand. These guys have collected petitions. It's really important.